to one's own advantage, or it means to change and transform things by skillful or unfair means so as to secure one's own advantage for a certain situation or outcome. So the question, if let's just for a moment, and if you'll bear with me, it'll make sense. Say that COVID-19 was simply a bioengineered form of SARS, which it is a SARS virus that came out of Wuhan, China, which it did. That's all documented. It is now, there's videotape, there's been interviews of people that were forced out of China because they wanted to reveal this to their own people and really to the world at large. These were scientists. Others disappeared there. So if you're not aware of that, that is available. You can find out all that information or verify that information for yourself. So COVID-19 did actually come out of there. But the question really that we need to be asking is, well, who's behind this and what do we do about it? What's our response to it? Because the truth is that no matter what it is or where it came from, or if it's natural or unnatural, been created or not created, you're dealing with it. Our president just got COVID-19 and he apparently is well on the way to recovery. At this time, he is back at the White House and ready to resume his work there. But this comes at a rather unusual time, and there's just so many strange and odd things about this, like most of his staff getting hit at the same time and different things like that. So who's behind what caused all of our real problems, which were mostly caused by the lockdown? Unfortunately, there were many people that from the end of January until today, which is 9 months, there were over 200 some thousand people that did pass away. And unfortunately, most of those already were very, very ill. Most of those, the vast majority of those, were in nursing homes and had what we now call technically or medically comorbidities. And so let's just say COVID-19 certainly enhanced whatever their problem was, may have caused some of those to pass early. But I don't think that any of the figures that we have are really something that most Americans trust exceedingly. So again, the question is who's behind the fear and who's behind the control issue, because it's not universal. It's certainly not universal in the world. There were more than 180 countries that did initially shut down, but they did that because the more developed countries that they respected a great deal and where they're also partner in either business or finance or some other way are all tied together. You know, it's been a shrinking world for years and we're now very, very connected. So 180 countries shut down, but then a lot of countries didn't shut down. And then many countries, after they shut down for what we were told was going to be a short season of 15 days, that turned into 30, that turned into 45, that turned into now 8 months for some states. Now that is not many states, but we still do have states like Virginia and California and states like this that never opened up. And we have other states like Illinois and Michigan and others, North Carolina, that never opened up completely. And then there was a spike, and nothing was ever explained to us about the spike. In other words, how many people, again, I think it was a fear thing. If we knew how many people that tested out of the, let's say, 20,000 people in Florida on a given day tested positive for COVID, how many were sick? We never ever found that out. They never gave us that information because fear and control seemed to be what this developed into. And so on the surface, I would say if you looked at it over all of these months, going back to what originally started this, it looks like an opportunity was seized by people who had a plan. When George Floyd, which was what most people say was the epicenter of all of the really incredibly wicked, evil things that happened since then and enhanced the fear to another whole level. When George Floyd was killed, interestingly enough, every person in America, black, yellow, red, white, doesn't make any difference, was united, and we had a tremendous opportunity to come together as a country and be unified. What stopped that? Well, what stopped that, obviously, were the riots that took place in Minneapolis. And first it started in Minneapolis, and then it began to shift to different cities around the country until at one time there were about 30 cities that were having major rioting issues. And of that, it seemed like a vast majority of those were almost part of a universal conspiracy because oddly enough, right up until that moment, we had never really been faced with an anti-police question. And yet BLM came on the scene and Antifa came on the scene. And Antifa, when they appeared on the scene, oddly enough, looked like the same group that we saw back in when President Trump was first elected and the rioting that immediately followed that election. They had the same clothing, they had the same style, they were using the same tactics. They destroyed universities, they destroyed main areas of town. And at that time, we should have dealt with this differently, in my humble opinion. But there was a transition period there when there was no one in charge that was going to stop it. And so they didn't stop that rioting. They arrested some people, but actually you or I never heard of anyone that was convicted out of any of that. And so that's going back to 2015. So when that happened, now it all of a sudden these same people are reappearing in Minneapolis, and they're burning and destroying and looting, and defund the police becomes a major issue. Like all across the country, we have a systemic police problem, which we do not, and we have a systemic racism issue, which we do not. So it would have been wisdom if people would have looked up BLM instead of just saying this, but because the mayors in certain cities and the governors in certain cities were supportive of BLM over law and order and caused their own police departments to back off, you and I got to watch the disintegration of America on TV, and then the whole world thought that America was in that, the entire country was in that same upheaval. And that promoted this great fear. Now, up until about 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, if you had gone on the internet and typed in Antifa on Google or some other search engine, it would have directed you to Biden's homepage. And that sounds crazy, but we were sure, of course, that must be a mistake. But they did acknowledge that that was true, but they said it didn't mean anything and there was no relationship between the two. But what was different in 2020 from 2015 and 2016 after the election was that millions of dollars began to pour into BLM. Hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars began to pour into BLM and Antifa from where? Because that now we'd have to get beyond the surface. Secondarily, I said it looked like mayors, looked like governors, looked like the prosecutors who were not prosecuting. It looked like, I'm talking about only in a few cities, I'm talking about in all democratically controlled cities, district attorneys in those cities, state district attorneys were not enforcing the law, and that enhanced everybody's fear until eventually many, many citizens were frightened almost incredibly. But I don't think you can lay the blame there. Since then, and in August, we began to get it completely revealed that there is a systemic problem, but it goes all the way back 40, 50 years through multiple administrations, Republican, Democratic, whether we were asleep or what it was, or parents were uninformed and people were uninformed. But our colleges and universities started being taken over by a socialist type of group with communist leanings. And they didn't have a name, but they were very well funded. So now, looking back, what we got revealed this summer ought to cause us all to wake up and say, wait a minute, are you telling me that for 20, 30, 40 years, hundreds of millions of dollars in annuities and donations have been pouring into universities to hire professors and change the whole learning concept? And yes, we now know that that's true. Not in all universities, of course, but in every one that could be possibly influenced. And then it got into our high schools, and now in our grade schools in Illinois, in Chicago, they were teaching 1619. Now, Chicago's the largest school district. I was on an advisory board for U46 for a number of years. That's the second largest school district outside of the city of Chicago, but they only have 50-some thousand children. Chicago has many more than that, and they're all being indoctrinated into 1619 educational learning, which is America is inherently bad, it's evil, wicked, and rotten. So that would look like the next level as we peel back the onion, but wait a minute, you have to say then, well, where's all that money coming from and who's giving it? Aha, that's where you should find out the truth. And so you find out that it's, of course, wealthy people, businessmen, financiers, George Soros and others have been named. Bill Gates is one of those, and it's just because they are absolutely convinced that the model that America holds up to the world, saying this is a good example of how to live, is not one that will enhance business the way that they would like to see business enhanced. And they are in favor of open borders among all nations, what we would call globalism. And it's also being sponsored by many, many, many other businesses, not just them. Walmart now, Starbucks, Nike, Kohl's. There's almost no one that hasn't fallen into this trap. I'm believing and hoping it's a trap. I'm hoping they're really just deceived. And so if that's the case, then where does that leave us? Well, that leaves us in Revelation chapter 18, and it describes this group in particular in the Bible all those years ago they knew that there was coming a day when they would have such influence and they would want to break down the barriers between nations so that they could make more money. And that fundamentally is it. It's described in Revelation 18 as Babylon. Now, what do we do? Well, thank you very much. Now let's end on some good news if you can. Colossians chapter 2 is a great thing for this. In verse 6 it says, "Therefore, as you have received Christ Jesus the Lord, so walk in him." You know, you can talk to a lot of people today and for many years and ask them, do you know Jesus? And they might say yes. But anymore, you have to ask, well, what does that mean? And what's that mean to you? I mean, not a challenge, but what's that mean to you? What church do you go to? Well, I don't really go to church. Well, where did you read today in the Bible? Did you read the Bible, or do you read the Bible? Well, I have a Bible, and I pray to God. I ask God for things all the time. And see, that's not the way you were supposed to receive Jesus Christ as Lord. I mean, if he's Lord, he's in control. If you're Lord, you're in control. And I think you gotta face up to that initial difference. And so verse 6 is really, really an important verse. And it says, having been firmly rooted in verse 7, and now being built up in him and established in your faith, just as you were instructed, and overflowing with gratitude. I started this whole meeting tonight with how grateful I am. I'm grateful to be alive. I'm grateful to be a Christian. I'm grateful to be somebody that loves my country. I'm grateful to be a pastor. I'm grateful to have people that love me. I'm grateful to God for so many things. It's wonderful. And it's a great way to live. And I feel really bad for all of the people that can't be grateful. And I wish that they just get born again and let God change their lives and let the burden off, and they didn't have to strive anymore, and they don't have to lie anymore, and they don't have to cheat anymore, and they don't have to fight anymore. And it'd be a great world. So see to it then, the next verse says, that no one takes you captive through philosophy and empty deception, according to the tradition of men, according to the elementary principles of the world, rather than according to Christ. For in him all the fullness of deity dwells in bodily form, and in him you have been made complete. And that's the word for today. If you want to get complete, if you want to find peace, if you want to know how to overcome, assuming that a lot of this stuff makes sense to you that I said tonight in these few brief moments, do not despair. Jesus came that you might have life and that more abundantly, and you can overcome through him if you walk in a manner worthy in which you've been called. God bless you. Have a great prayer time tonight, and we'll see you